The dust tasted like despair. It coated everything, the rough planks of the auction block, the worn hats of the men gathered like vultures, the very air thick with sweat and anticipation. Sarah huddled on the platform, her limbs trembling not just from cold, though the wind bit through her thin rags, but from bone-deep terror. Below, faces blurred into a single, avaricious entity, eyes scanning her like chattel. She was being sold. A human being reduced to muscle, bone, and the capacity for labor. Her breath hitched in her throat, a dry, rasping sound lost in the auctioneer's rapid-fire calls. Going once, going twice, each word hammered another nail into her coffin of hope. A man stood slightly apart from the main throng, his presence quiet but distinct. He wasn't looking at her with the leering hunger of the others. His gaze was level, assessing the crowd more than the wares. He wore practical, worn clothes, a faded bandana around his neck, a face weathered by sun and silence. He hadn't spoken, hadn't bid on the mule or the tools or the bolts of fabric already sold. He was here for something else. The whispers said he was a solitary man, lived out past the river bend, kept to himself. Some spoke of him with suspicion, others with grudging respect for his self-sufficiency. He was known simply as Cole. Sarah hadn't noticed him until the bidding for her began. The numbers rose slowly, hesitantly at first, then gaining speed as a few eager voices vied for ownership. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to disappear, to become invisible. She heard the sums climb, each increment a fresh wave of nausea. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be real. She was a person. She had a name. She had memories of a different life, before the sickness took her family, before the debts swallowed everything, before she was left with nothing but her own skin. $50! A man bellowed, his voice rough, sending a tremor through Sarah. She knew that voice. It belonged to a man who owned the livery stable, a man with a reputation for cruelty to animals and hired hands alike. He was close now, pushing through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her with chilling intent. The bidding seemed to stall. The auctioneer waited, hammer poised. Sarah felt her last shred of courage drain away. This was it. This was her end. Then, a voice, clear and resonant, cut through the air. Not loud but commanding. $100. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. All heads turned towards Cole. $100 was an exorbitant sum for a girl whose frailty was obvious, whose history was unknown, whose future promised only hardship. The liveryman scowled, spitting in the dust. You crazy, Cole? She ain't worth that. Cole didn't acknowledge him. His gaze remained steady, now fixed on the auctioneer. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned, recovered. $100. From the gentleman at the back. Any advance. Silence. The shock held the crowd motionless. Going once. Going twice, the hammer fell with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden stillness. Sold. To the gentleman for $100. Sarah's eyes flew open. Sold. But to him, the quiet man? He walked towards the platform slowly, deliberately, the crowd parting before him. He didn't look at her with ownership, but with a strange, unreadable neutrality. He reached the platform, his hand briefly touching the rough wood before extending towards her, not to pull her down, but simply offered. His face was impassive, giving away nothing. Sarah stared at his hand, then up at his face. Her heart pounded, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. What did this mean? Who was he? Why had he done this? The questions screamed in her mind, but no sound escaped her lips. The town watched, silent and judging, as Cole took her arm, a surprisingly gentle grip, and led her down from the block, away from the gaping faces, towards the edge of the dusty square, leaving behind the murmuring crowd and the echo of a hammer blow that had shattered her world, only to seemingly rebuild it in a way she couldn't comprehend. The world outside the town was vast and indifferent. The wind whipped across the plains, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. They walked for what felt like an eternity, Cole setting a steady, unhurried pace, Sarah stumbling slightly behind him, her legs weak, her mind reeling. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the gravelly earth and the sigh of the wind. Sarah kept her eyes on Cole's back. It was broad and straight, suggesting quiet strength. He didn't look back, didn't check on her. He simply moved forward, a silent, guiding force in the immense landscape. Fear still gnawed at her, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was mingled with a strange, nascent curiosity. Where was he taking her? What did he want? As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Cole finally stopped. They were on a rise overlooking a valley, the land rolling away towards distant, hazy mountains. He turned, and for the first time since the auction block, his eyes met hers fully. They were the color of the sky just before a storm, gray, deep and watchful. There was no pity in them, nor was there cruelty, just a quiet assessment. "We'll make camp here," he said, his voice low and rough, like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed. His first words to her. Simple, practical. He set about building a small fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Sarah watched him, mesmerized. He seemed utterly at ease in this wild, untamed place. She had spent her life in the confines of a small town, where nature was something distant, observed from windows. Here it was immediate and overwhelming. The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows. Cole took out a small tin of dried meat and a piece of hardtack, offering half to her. "Eat," he commanded gently. Sarah took the food, her fingers clumsy. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the offer was made. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, the warmth of the fire spreading through her chilled body. Cole ate his share, then refilled his water skin from a canteen. He didn't press her with questions. He didn't demand thanks. He simply existed alongside her, sharing the fire and the silence. Later, wrapped in a blanket he had produced from his pack, a surprisingly soft wool against her raw skin, Sarah watched him as he sat by the dying embers, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She still didn't understand, but the terror had begun to recede, replaced by a weary resignation and a flicker of something else. Trust? It was a dangerous thought, fragile and easily broken, but it took root nonetheless. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't demanded anything. He had simply removed her from a nightmare and brought her to this quiet, cold solitude. She thought of the town, the faces she had seen, the judgment in their eyes as they watched Cole take her away. She was damaged goods, a burden, maybe worse in their eyes. And Cole, the man who bought her, was now linked to that judgment. He had disrupted their neat order, their cruel expectations. He had paid a fortune for. What? A debt he felt? A moment of impulse? She couldn't fathom it. But under the watchful gaze of the stars, with the wind whispering secrets through the grass, Sarah felt a fragile sense of safety she hadn't known in a long time. She fell asleep, the scent of smoke and dry earth in her nostrils, the silent presence of the man who bought her a strange, unsettling comfort. Days blurred into a week as they journeyed further from the town. They reached Cole's dwelling, a sturdy, unassuming cabin nestled in a remote valley, surrounded by towering trees and the sound of a rushing creek. It was small, practical, and smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. It wasn't much, but compared to the constant threat she had lived under, it felt like a palace. Cole didn't call it home, but it clearly was. Life here was hard, dictated by the rhythms of the land. Chopping wood, hauling water, tending a small patch of stubborn vegetables, hunting for meat. Cole did most of the heavy work, but Sarah, as her strength returned, began to find her place. She started small, sweeping the dirt floor, washing clothes in the creek. Cole watched her, his gaze still assessing, but with less intensity now. He didn't praise her, didn't demand her labor as payment. She simply did what needed doing, what she was able to do, and slowly, tentatively, a routine emerged. The silence between them was still vast, but it changed. It became less a void of unspoken fear and more a shared quietude. They communicated through action and observation. Cole would leave a pile of wood near the cabin door if he knew she was feeling stronger. She would ensure there was a hot meal waiting when he returned from hunting. Little gestures building an invisible bridge between them. Sarah learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the tension in his shoulders after a long day. He, she suspected, learned to read her too, noting the return of color to her cheeks, the lessening tremor in her hands. One evening, while mending a tear in her dress by the firelight, Sarah finally found the courage to ask the question that had haunted her since the auction block. Why? The word was small, hesitant. Cole paused in sharpening his knife. He looked at the fire for a long moment before answering, his voice quiet. Didn't need a gun that day, he said. It was a cryptic answer, one that confused her more than it clarified. He had been planning to buy a gun? Why? And what did that have to do with her? She waited, hoping he would elaborate, but he returned to his task, the matter apparently closed. It wasn't the explanation she sought, but there was something in his simple statement, the lack of grand pronouncements or self-justification, that felt honest. The tenuous peace was broken by the arrival of strangers. 3 men on horseback rode into the valley one afternoon while Cole was out checking traps. Sarah saw them from the cabin window, figures against the sky, dark and menacing. Her heart leaped into her throat. Townspeople. Come for her? Come for Cole? They rode straight for the cabin, their faces grim. Sarah stood frozen, the fear she thought she had conquered surging back, stronger than ever. They dismounted, their hands resting near their gun belts. The leader, a burly man she vaguely recognized from the auction crowd, stepped forward. "We know you're in there," he called out, his voice rough with authority. "Heard Cole bought himself a girl. Seems like he might be hiding something. We've come to see about it." Sarah's mind raced. Hide? Hide what? Was he a criminal? Was that why he lived out here? The fragile trust she had built wavered. But then she remembered his quiet kindness, his steady presence, his protection. No, whatever the reason, she knew he wasn't cruel like these men. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the door, her legs trembling, but her chin lifted. She would not hide. She would not be afraid. She opened the door and stepped out onto the small porch, facing them directly. "He's not here," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised to see her standing there, not cowering. The leader smirked. "Well now, girlie, ain't you a picture of health compared to what we saw on the block? The town's talkin', saying Cole kidnapped you, maybe worse. We're here to take you back. For your own good." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah stated, her voice gaining strength. "He didn't kidnap me. He bought me, fair and square. And I'm staying." Her words hung in the air, bold and defiant. The men stared at her, taken aback by her unexpected resilience. The leader's smirk vanished, replaced by a sneer. "You think you got a say in it? Your property. And there's questions about how Cole came by that money. Maybe it wasn't so fair and square." Just then, a figure emerged from the trees at the edge of the clearing. Cole. He walked towards them, his rifle held loosely in one hand, his expression unreadable as always. But there was a tension in his posture that spoke volumes. The men tensed, their hands dropping to their gun belts. The leader squared his shoulders. "Cole, we need to talk about the girl." Cole stopped a few yards away, his gaze sweeping over the men, then settling on Sarah. She met his eyes, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, standing together against the encroaching world, the bond forged in hardship and quiet understanding solidified. Sarah wasn't just the girl he bought. She was standing as his partner, her presence a shield as much as his rifle. The wind sighed through the trees, carrying the tension of the standoff across the silent valley. Cole didn't raise his rifle. He simply held it, a silent promise. His gaze was steady, unwavering, meeting the challenge in the eyes of the men. He didn't need to speak. His presence, his quiet strength, was a language they understood. The leader shifted uneasily, glancing at his companions. They hadn't expected this, a frail girl standing defiant, a silent man radiating calm danger. The town, they realized, had misjudged. "She says she's stayin'," the leader grumbled, testing the air. Cole nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "She is." "There's talk," another man ventured, his voice less confident now. "About how you got that $100. Cole's gaze sharpened slightly, but his tone remained level. "My business. Not yours," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "You want trouble, you'll find it here. You want to ride back to town. Ride?" The men exchanged nervous glances. They were three, but they weren't fools. Cole wasn't a talker, but his reputation for handling himself was well-earned. And the girl, her unexpected courage added an unpredictable element. They had come expecting to intimidate, to reclaim property, perhaps to find evidence of a crime. Instead, they found two people standing together, resilient and unyielding. The leader hesitated for another long moment, then spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Cole. The town ain't forgot," but the threat lacked conviction. He turned and remounted his horse. The other two followed suit. With one last, lingering look at the cabin and the figures standing before it, they turned their horses and rode back the way they came, their departure less an exit and more a retreat. Sarah watched them go, her legs finally giving way as the adrenaline drained from her. She sank onto the porch steps, breathing heavily. Cole lowered his rifle and walked towards her. He didn't offer platitudes or ask if she was all right. He simply sat beside her on the steps, his shoulder brushing hers. A silent, comforting presence. The encounter changed things. The town's direct interference had been repelled, not by violence, but by quiet defiance and a shared front. News of their failed attempt would spread, carrying with it not tales of a kidnapped girl or a desperate outlaw, but of a quiet man and a surprisingly strong woman who stood together against judgment. The town was touched, not in a way that brought universal acceptance, but in a way that sowed doubt in their cruelty, a grudging acknowledgement of a different kind of strength. Life continued in the valley, still hard, still isolated, but imbued with a deeper sense of purpose. Sarah was no longer the girl bought on an auction block. She was a partner, a survivor who had found her voice, her strength, her dignity in the most unlikely of places. Cole, the silent man, had found something too, not just a companion, but a reflection of resilience that matched his own. One evening, as the sun set painting the valley in gold, Sarah stood outside the cabin, watching the colors fade. Cole stood beside her, his gaze, as always, on the horizon. "Thank you," she said softly, the words feeling inadequate for the life he had given her, the strength she had found beside him. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw something akin to a gentle smile touch his lips. "Didn't need that gun," he repeated, his eyes holding hers. This time she understood. He had come prepared for a different kind of fight against different adversaries. But the real fight, the one that mattered, had been found not in taking a life, but in saving one, in building a life, in standing together against a world that wanted to break them. They were two solitary souls, bound by an act of defiance, forged into something resilient and whole by shared hardship and unspoken understanding. The town might still whisper, but their judgment no longer held power here, in the quiet valley where dignity had found its home.